Good morning, friends, and welcome to Wake Up in the Word. Hey, thanks for joining me this morning. Hey, I brought the Peanuts character cup in with me today, and there's a reason why. Of course, it's got a lot of characters on here, but you might remember this little guy. That's Linus. And if you've ever watched A Charlie Brown Christmas, you know that it was Linus who, as we get ready to look at the birth of Jesus, it was Linus who stood on the stage when Charlie Brown was saying, "What's Christmas really all about?" in quotes from Luke chapter 2. Well, you would think, oh, that means you're going to jump right into Luke 2 today. No, we're actually going to start in Matthew chapter number 1 because we're looking at how the Messiah came to be. And of course, we've seen how Mary has accepted the word that she's going to have the Son of God. She's very much pregnant with this baby. She's never been with Joseph or any other man for that matter. How's Joseph dealing with this? Well, we find out in Matthew's gospel, beginning in verse number 18, where we get this side of the story before we jump back to Luke. It says that the birth of Jesus Christ came about this way. After his mother Mary had been engaged to Joseph, it was discovered before they came together that she was pregnant from the Holy Spirit. So her husband Joseph, being a righteous man and not wanting to disgrace her publicly, decided to divorce her secretly. Now at this point the question is, does Joseph believe the story? What's going through his mind right now? He knows what the law says about this. I mean, in times prior to the Roman occupation, Mary would have been stoned. I mean, what are we talking about here? Because she obviously would have been considered unfaithful. That's why she's pregnant. And so Joseph doesn't understand all these things. No one's appeared to him to explain it yet. I can imagine when Mary shared this news with Joseph, if it was Mary that shared it at all, it may have been a messenger. Who knows that it wasn't received very well. And who can blame him? Would you have believed that story? And come on, Mary's pregnant. And by the way, she says it's no guy, it's the Holy Spirit. She's going to give birth to the Messiah. Yeah, right. Well, Joseph does what a righteous man would do. Instead of being bitter and angry and somehow trying to, in a vengeful way, get back at Mary and maybe Mary's whole family, instead it said being a righteous man didn't want to disgrace her publicly. He was going to divorce her secretly. Now, the word divorce may be troubling to some folks. Wait a minute. They must have already been married if he was going to have a divorce. No. They were engaged by contract, as was the custom of the day. It had been for generations. When that engagement begins, a contract is laid out between the two families. And at that point, you belong to each other, even though you have not come together to consummate the marriage. The man goes off to prepare a place for his bride. He will eventually come back to get her, and they will have a wedding ceremony, and sometimes those would last for days. And then, and only then, do they go back home. The marriage is consummated and completed. And so, as that scenario is laid out for Joseph and Mary, it's during this time of engagement, when they have not come together, that she is found to be pregnant. Therefore, the contract would have to be broken. The contract that says the two of them at a certain time are going to come together and be married. And so that required a divorce. That's a breaking of the marital contract, even though the marriage hasn't been consummated. So here's what happens. In the middle of all this that's going on in Joseph's confused mind, in verse 20 we read that after he had considered these things, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream, saying, "Joseph, son of David, don't be afraid to take Mary as your wife, because what has been conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. She will give birth to a son, and you're to name him Jesus, because he will save his people from their sins." Now all this took place to fulfill what was spoken of by the Lord through the prophet, and the prophet is Isaiah. And verse 23 gives us that quotation from the Old Testament. "See, the virgin will become pregnant and give birth to a son, and they will name him Emmanuel." You want some evidence of the divinity of Christ before he's even born? Here it is. What does Emmanuel mean? Well, the verse tells us, which is translated, God is with us. Yes, he is. And that's what Christmas, that's what the gospel is all about. Well, it says in verse 24, when Joseph woke up, he did as the Lord's angel had commanded him. He married her, but did not have sexual relations with her until she gave birth to a son, and he named him Jesus. Well, when that birth came, though, the time for that birth to come, it's going to be quite an interesting situation for them because of all the timing, okay, of all the things that the Roman emperor, who doesn't know Mary and Joseph from anybody, of all the things that could be done from faraway Rome, this is what made possible the fulfillment of Micah's prophecy where the Messiah would be born. We're back now in Luke chapter 2, and the very first thing we read is about the actions of someone who is clueless to all this Jewish religion stuff, all this Messiah stuff, but he makes a decree that God uses to make sure that Jesus is born in Bethlehem. What am I talking about? Verse number 1 of Luke 2 says, in those days a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that the whole world, the whole empire, should be registered. Now, this registration took place while Quirinius was governing Syria, so everyone went to be registered, each to his own town. Now, this is from the Christian Standard Bible, using that phrase, registered. Several translations use something similar to that. They'll say registered, or that a census was to be taken of the entire Roman world. Matter of fact, in the Amplified Bible, it says that the whole inhabited world, in parentheses, the Roman Empire, should be registered in a census. But the reason for registering them in a census, rightfully translated from the King James and several other versions, is so that everyone could be taxed. That's the only real reason. You need to know who everybody is and where they are so you can check off the list and make sure they're paying their taxes. So those versions that say to be taxed, it's all the same. It means the same. Joseph had to take his bride to, of all places, Bethlehem, where they were going to be registered so that the Roman authorities could get their money. What they didn't realize is that they were helping God fulfill the very scriptures that point to Messiah. Because it says in verse 4, Joseph also went up from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea, to the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and the family line of David, to be registered along with Mary, who was engaged to him and was pregnant. And while they were there, the time came for her to give birth. And then she gave birth to her firstborn son. She wrapped him tightly in cloth and laid him in a manger because there was no guest room available for them. Now, there's an awful lot in this passage, but I want you to grasp what this whole Bethlehem journey is all about. You know what Bethlehem means? It means the house of bread. It's Jesus who would later say, I am the bread of life. He would connect himself to everything from the manna in the wilderness to the Passover lamb to the fulfillment, the meaning of the town in which he was actually born, the house of bread. When he is born, what do they do with the baby Jesus? Well, they wrap him tightly in cloths, which is reminiscent of what they used to do with the baby lambs when they were born, something the shepherds would do to keep them from injuring themselves. And what do they do with Jesus? They put him in a manger. You may think that's just an accidental occurrence because they had no other place to put him. There's no bassinet for baby Jesus in those days. But they put him in a manger, which is a feeding trough for animals, a place from which others are fed. And here we are in the house of bread. I mean, we're already getting all these indicators of exactly who Jesus is, who he's going to be when he grows up. Jesus has been born. And when we see some of the things that happen after that birth, there's confirmation after confirmation that just declares rightfully so, that this is the Messiah. Well, that's all we have time for this morning, but we'll continue this wonderful Christmas story in June tomorrow as we wake up in the Word. So you join us, and hey, let's remember what the Christmas story is really all about. It's God's grace, His willingness to save, so that you and I could be a part of God's great growing family. I'll see you tomorrow right here when we wake up in His Word.